UNESCO Remote Radio Week 2021. Get ready for a week devoted to helping radio stations broadcast remotely.
Namaste. My name is Dev Kumar Sunuwar. I am an Indigenous journalist, currently acting as a chairperson of Indigenous television, which is the Nepal's first and only Indigenous community-run community television, and the founder of a number of Indigenous-led community radios and television channel in Nepal. Today, I would like to present the relationship between Indigenous peoples and media, and mainly I will share an experience why media content in Indigenous language is very important, especially during the crisis like COVID-19. Let me begin with the Indigenous peoples and their relationships with the media. Indigenous peoples for a long time have hesitant relationships with the so-called mainstream media or the mass media, because these media mostly have been the voice of the dominant groups or the voice of the powerful people or people who are in the power. And these media often are used as the weapons for the destructions of Indigenous people's values, Indigenous belief systems, and their identities. Moreover, Indigenous peoples have no access, they have no participations, and they have no voice at all, or let's say in this mainstream media. Even if the Indigenous peoples have access to the media, or they are reported in the mainstream media, but they are not portrayed properly or they're represented properly. But in the past few decades, the Indigenous peoples have not only adapted these media technologies to use them to meet their own political or the cultural needs, but also have made incredible efforts worldwide to establish a media in their own languages, in their own communities, by themselves and for their own people or for their own communities. And they have used these medias, especially the community radios, or the community media, in order to amplify their voices, or in order to bring their land or the forest claims to the attention of the policymakers, or including to expose their histories of struggles for the survivals, and also to bring into the attention of international communities. Therefore, the Indigenous media has, in recent days, increasingly have become the targets of many authorities who want to suppress the broadcasting of the informations on the violation of their rights. So, if you see a number of international human rights laws, including UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, especially if you look at the Article 16 of this UN BRIP adopted in 2007, this provision actually guarantee that Indigenous peoples have a right to have or establish their own media, or they have a right to access to the media in their own languages. However, the Indigenous peoples have been excluded from accessing media for many reasons, such as geographical locations. What I basically mean to say is many the medias which are concentrated in the district headquarters or the city areas. Therefore, Indigenous peoples have no physical access to the media, and neither they have been able to influence in their content. In relation to the content, when we talk about content, the language actually has remained one of the major barrier for indigenous peoples to access the media, because the content in the language that indigenous peoples speak and understand is still limited in majority of media. That means the majority of media do not have a media content in the indigenous languages. With this, I would like to give you, or this year, an example why the informations or the media content or the informations in the media, let's say information delivery in the media in indigenous language or the local language is important, relating with the this crisis like COVID-19 pandemic. The COVID-19, this pandemic, no doubt that it did not discriminate against anyone, in the sense that the COVID-19 actually infected everyone, regardless of their class, creed, or the caste. However, the indigenous peoples, they were and they are believed to be more vulnerable of being infected with the deadly disease, mainly because of three reasons. There are many reasons, but here I would like to lay down mainly three reasons. The first reason is the indigenous peoples actually lacked, because of lack of awareness. Let's say lack of awareness is one of the major reasons. Indigenous peoples lag behind, which when it comes to consuming of the media, a majority of indigenous peoples, they do not own the media tools like television or the radio sets, because of being illiterate, or due to the low literacy level, they do not read a newspaper. They also lack the access to the internet, right? So they hardly got the health messages being conveyed by the government. And as I said earlier, the language was another barrier for them to access the life-saving messages. A number of messages which were delivered by the media in the national languages, but the majority of indigenous people still, they do not understand, or they do not even speak the national language, through which most of the messages relating to the COVID-19 were, and they are still being delivered. As a result, indigenous peoples actually failed to take the precautionary measures, right? The second reason is the second reasons why indigenous peoples were and they are vulnerable to be infected with the deadly diseases like pandemic is the deprivation of the government services. The indigenous peoples, they must live in remote and underserved areas with no or very little access to the healthcare, and they have to walk, or they need to walk for hours or the days to get basic health care, basic health services. And when there was an outbreak of the coronavirus or COVID-19, due to outmigrations, and majority of them actually did not get the health messages as they were living in a far-flung area or remote area. The third reason is the unique way of living, which I basically want to say is indigenous peoples live in a large or joint families. They mostly live in their own ancestral houses. In such a setting, it would be very difficult to isolate the elderly people. So they can easily be exposed to deadly viruses. Also, that the elderly people to whom that we emphasized to keep them in isolations, these elderly people have a significant role in the indigenous communities, especially while performing the ceremonies, the rituals, or the other social gatherings. So if an indigenous person living in a joint family gets the virus, and he or she is likely to get infected, right? I mean, she is likely to infect, not only get infected, but also infect everyone in the family. Therefore, in this, what I want to say is during this COVID pandemic, I don't mean that the media did not do anything, right? The media played a great role, a great role in regards to serving people relentlessly by disseminating the information about the disease. However, the media could play even more important roles or more roles during a crisis like COVID-19 if they could produce life-saving health messages into different indigenous languages. What we know is that especially in Nepal, the indigenous peoples, and this is not only in Nepal, the indigenous peoples elsewhere hardly got informations about the COVID-19 in their own languages. So, for instance, in Nepal, the news, the public service announcement, which were produced mostly or majority in Nepali language. And some of us, the indigenous media practitioners, actually produced and distributed the public service announcement into over 40 plus different indigenous languages for last 2 years, both in audio and visuals, through indigenous television and through indigenous community radio network. So in this sense, one might argue that the indigenous peoples also can understand the national language, and there is no fault in giving or disseminating informations in the national language. What I want to say is indigenous peoples may understand the national language just enough to communicate with their counterpart, but for them to fully grasp the message or the meaning of the message about the COVID-19, because majority of terms are terminologies which were used even in English, right? So they need to get it in their own languages. For example, in Nepal, let me give you another example is, in Nepal, the capital city, Kathmandu. The police asked people to stay indoors through a speaker device. So especially after the lockdowns was announced. So Kathmandu's local indigenous Newar communities actually heard the police, but they did not respond because they did not fully understand what the police were saying or what they were being told. So they understood only why they were being told to stay indoors, only after the mayor of the Kathmandu metropolitan city delivered a message in Newari language, in their own mother tongue. So soon after the mayor delivered that message, all ward committees of the Kathmandu started disseminating information about the lockdowns in Newari languages, Newari indigenous languages. As a result, even elderly and illiterate people locked themselves up in their own houses to avoid being infected, right? So this actually shows why content or the media content or the content of the message in indigenous language is important. So as I said earlier, most of the indigenous peoples live in remote areas. So During the COVID-19, for almost 2 years, the indigenous peoples across the globe, they have been and they are deprived of not just healthcare, but also informations, right? So it is crucial to provide informations to them in their own languages. Now, as the International Decade of Indigenous Languages is starting from 2022 January, and the UNESCO has taken the role of a lead agency of the UN for this global campaign. During this decade, I would like to urge the international communities of organizations, especially working on indigenous languages, also partner with and invest on the indigenous-led community radios and television or the community medias in order to reach to the indigenous communities and in order to uplift their languages, and also to ensure their right to information in the language that they speak and understand is guaranteed and realized in practical level. So I can talk hours and hours about the role of media for enhancing indigenous people's access, their voice and participation in the media. But for now, I think my time is up. So I would like to stop here. Thank you so much once again for this opportunity to share my experience in relation to the relationship between the indigenous peoples and media and experiences, why the indigenous language is important, or why the message in indigenous language is important during the crisis like COVID-19. Thank you once again. Namaste.